She saw it happen in 2 seconds flat. The waiter's hand. The vial. The shadow it cast over a $4,000 glass of wine belonging to the most dangerous man in Seoul. Zuhara had 3 options. Scream, and his guards would put a bullet in her skull before the sound left her throat. Run, and the man with eyes like black ice would be dead in 4 minutes. Or do the one thing nobody in that restaurant would ever predict a waitress from Lagos would do. To the most feared man in all of Korea. She kissed him. Not softly. Not nervously. Hard. Deliberate. Like a woman who had already decided she might not survive the next 60 seconds, and had chosen to spend them saving a man she had never spoken to. Ji-hoon Kwon did not flinch. He did not pull back. He did not reach for the weapon underneath his jacket. He tasted the warning in her lips, citrus and iron and something that felt dangerously like courage, and his first thought was not who sent her. His first thought was, I have been looking for her. She saved his life at 9:14 p.m. on a Thursday. By 9:16, she was surrounded by his men. By midnight, she was 80 stories above Seoul, standing in a penthouse that cost more than her entire country's GDP, reading a marriage contract with her name already printed on it. He had been watching her for months. She had never known he existed. But here is what neither of them knew yet. She had not walked into that restaurant by accident. And the kiss that was supposed to save his life had just started a war neither of them could win. What happens when the woman who saves the monster turns out to be more dangerous than he is? The poison hit the glass at 9:13 p.m. Zuhara Adeyemi saw it because she was already watching. Not him, the waiter. The one with the pressed collar and the trembling jaw and the left hand that stayed inside his jacket pocket 3 seconds longer than any professional server's hand ever should. She had been carrying a tray of appetizers she would never deliver. The Blue Dragon Bistro smelled of saffron and money and the particular kind of silence that falls over a room when someone powerful enters it. Every table had gone slightly rigid when Ji-hoon Kwon arrived. Even the candle flames seemed to straighten. Zuhara had noticed none of that. She was watching the waiter's thumb. The vial was small, the size of a breath mint capsule, the color of water. The shadow it cast over the Romani Conti lasted less than a heartbeat. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. If she had looked away to balance her tray, the most feared man in Korea would have been dead before his next sentence. She had 2 seconds. Her brain ran the options like a fire drill. Scream. His 4 bodyguards would shoot her before the sound traveled 6 feet. Grab the glass. Same result. Faster. Run. The man dies. And something in her chest, something she had no name for yet, refused that option with a ferocity that frightened her. So she chose the only door that none of them would see coming. She crossed the 3 meters between them in 4 steps, set her tray down with the precision of a woman who had been rehearsing this her entire life without knowing it, and she kissed Ji-hoon Kwon on the mouth. The room stopped breathing. His lips were cold. Hers were shaking. She pressed the warning into him the only way that wouldn't get her killed in the next 4 seconds. The wine, your man, don't swallow, and she felt the exact moment his body understood. He didn't pull back. He pulled her closer. His arm moved around her waist like a door closing. Quiet, total, final. And over his shoulder she watched the waiter's face collapse into something between panic and fury. Ji-hoon's mouth moved against hers. One word. Low. Almost gentle. Names. Not a question. A sentence with a blade in it. He already knew she wasn't staff. Zuhara felt it in the way his hand pressed flat against her spine. Not desperate, not confused. Controlled. The grip of a man cataloging information while his mouth performed a different scene entirely for the room. She had kissed him to save his life. He was using the kiss to interrogate her. The waiter, she breathed against his lips. Left jacket pocket. The vial is still on him. Ji-hoon didn't look. Didn't signal. Didn't move a single visible muscle. But across the room, 2 of his men stood simultaneously, the way wolves stand, without discussion, without sound, and the waiter disappeared through the kitchen door, sandwiched between 400 pounds of quiet violence before a single fork had been set down. The room noticed nothing. Ji-hoon finally pulled back. Not far. 2 inches. Close enough that the candlelight caught the exact expression on his face, and Zuhara's blood went cold. Because it wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was curiosity. The focused, surgical kind. The kind a man aims at something he intends to take apart slowly. "You're not on the staff roster," he said. His English was perfect. Unhurried. Like he had all night, and several of them belonged to her already. "No," Zuhara said. "You're not a guest." "No. Then you came here specifically for me." He tilted his head exactly 1 degree. "The question is whether you came to save me or to confirm the job was done." The accusation landed like a hand around her throat. "I just saved your life," she said. "You made contact with my mouth without permission in a room full of people who would kill you for touching me." His eyes hadn't moved from hers. Dark. Depthless. Utterly calm. "That is not saving someone. That is making a calculated move and hoping I don't punish you for it." "Are you going to?" He didn't answer. Instead he picked up the poison glass, swirled it once, elegant, unhurried, and set it back down. "My name is known in 43 countries, he said quietly. "Yours is not. Yet you risked your life for it." He stood, buttoning his jacket with one hand. "That means you either know something I don't." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Or you're the most dangerous person in this room." His hand closed around her wrist. Not roughly. Worse than roughly. Gently. The first bullet took the head off a $5,000 orchid arrangement. Nobody screamed. That was the terrifying part. The Blue Dragon's clientele, senators, cartel bankers, men whose names appeared in classified documents, simply dropped, trained by wealth and proximity to violence into a specific kind of survival instinct. Hit the floor. Stay small. Don't be interesting. Zuhara had no such training. She was still standing when the second shot came. Ji-hoon moved before she processed the sound, one hand slamming her sideways, his body rotating to absorb the angle, the heavy mahogany table flipping in a single motion that should have been physically impossible for one man. It landed on its edge between them and the shooter like a wall. She hit the marble floor hard. He was already above her. Not hiding. Covering. The difference was everything. "How many?" he said. Not to her. His earpiece. The answer came back in Korean. His jaw tightened by 2 millimeters. 3 entry points, he translated, for reasons she didn't understand yet. Why was he telling her? East kitchen. Roof access. And someone already inside before we arrived. "The waiter," Zuhara said. The waiter was the distraction. His weapon was in his hand now. She hadn't seen him draw it. "The poison was to make me move. Movement creates a target." Her mind seized on that. The poison was to make him move. Which meant someone had predicted his escape route. Which meant someone inside his organization had told them where he would go. "Your men," she said. "One of your men is." "I know." Flat. Final. Already grieving it. 3 shots. His arm extended across her shoulder, weapon angled upward. Thud. 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 Precise as punctuation. 3 bodies hit the floor in the spaces between tables. The shooting stopped. Silence collapsed over the restaurant like a physical weight. Zuhara's entire body was shaking. She could feel the recoil of his weapon still vibrating through his chest above her. Could feel his heartbeat, steady, measured, almost slow. She looked up at him. "You've done this before," she whispered. He looked down at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Fast, gone before she could name it. "The man who sent those shooters," he said quietly. "He knows your face now." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Which means tonight, You don't exist anywhere but next to me. The bodies were still warm when Ji-hoon started making calls. Zuhara stood 3 feet away, arms wrapped around herself, watching him work. No panic in his voice. No elevation in his breathing. He spoke in Korean, then Mandarin, then something she didn't recognize. Clipped, guttural, final, and with each call another piece of the evening disappeared. Cameras. Witnesses. Evidence. Gone. 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 As though the last 11 minutes had never happened. She should have run. Every rational instinct she had was pointing at the exit sign above the east corridor, screaming at her in her mother's voice to move. Zuhara, move. But her legs had made a separate decision. They had decided that the most dangerous place in Seoul was also, inexplicably, the only place she wouldn't die tonight. She hated that her legs were probably right. Ji-hoon ended his final call and turned to look at her with the particular attention of a man who had forgotten nothing. You're still here, he said. You told me I couldn't leave. I told you that you don't exist anywhere but next to me. He slid his phone into his pocket. That isn't the same as a cage. That's a calculation. He tilted his head. You're smart enough to know the difference. Am I smart enough to know why you've been watching me? The question hit the air between them like a thrown object. Ji-hoon went very still. Not the stillness of guilt. The stillness of a man recalibrating, deciding in real time, exactly how much truth to deploy. What makes you think I have been? Because you knew my name, Zuhara said. In the restaurant. Before I told you anything. You said it against my mouth while I was warning you about the poison. She held his gaze. I never introduced myself. There's no reservation under my name. I'm not on your staff roster. She took 1 step toward him. You knew exactly who was kissing you before I finished the sentence. The silence that followed had weight to it. Ji-hoon studied her the way a man studies something he has underestimated and will not underestimate again. You notice everything, he said quietly. So do you, she said. Which means we both know this conversation is already 3 steps behind what's actually happening. His mouth moved. Almost a smile. Almost. Then his phone rang again. Different tone, different urgency, and whatever had been building between them shattered. His expression closed like a shutter. We need to move, he said. Now. Why? What was that call? He looked at her, and for the first time since the shooting, something in his eyes looked almost like warning. They didn't send 3 men to kill me tonight, Zuhara. He moved toward the exit. They sent 3 men to find out who was with me. The Mercedes moved through Seoul like a dark secret. No sirens followed. No lights. The city outside the tinted windows looked obscenely normal. Street vendors, neon signs, couples arguing under convenience store awnings, and Zuhara sat in the back seat feeling like she had fallen through a crack in the world and landed somewhere that ran on completely different rules. Ji-hoon was on his 3rd call since the car moved. She was counting because counting was the only thing keeping her breathing steady. The leather seat smelled of cedarwood and something colder underneath it. 2 bodyguards sat in front, Beck and another man whose name she hadn't caught, both with a particular posture of people who had learned to be invisible inside their own bodies. Professionally absent. She stared at her hands. They had stopped shaking 4 minutes ago. She was almost angry at them for that. Ji-hoon ended his call. The silence that followed was a different kind than the restaurant silence. Tighter, more deliberate, the kind that arrives when someone has something to say and is choosing the exact right weapon for it. You're in shock, he said, not looking at her. I'm fine. Your left hand keeps reaching for your phone and stopping. You've done it 6 times. Your phone isn't there. They took it when you got in the car. He paused. You were going to call someone. Someone specific. Someone you're now terrified knows you're missing. Zuhara turned to look at him. Give it back, she said. No. Just that. No explanation. No apology. No, solid as concrete, twice as cold. You don't get to. Ope is fine. Her blood stopped. That name. Her brother's name. In this man's mouth. In this car. Said with the casual precision of someone handling information they had owned for a long time. She couldn't speak. Ji-hoon finally looked at her, and the expression on his face was the most terrifying thing she had encountered all evening, including the bullets. Because it was gentle. He's in Busan, Ji-hoon said quietly. He doesn't know what happened tonight. He won't, unless you do something that forces my hand. He reached across and with his thumb, one slow, deliberate movement, brushed a smear of blood from her cheekbone. Good girl, he murmured. Stay calm. Stay close. He turned back to the window. And understand that I already know everything about you that matters. The penthouse did not look like a prison. That was the problem. 80 floors above Seoul, behind floor-to-ceiling glass that made the city look like a circuit board someone had set on fire. Ji-hoon Kwan's home was the most beautiful trap Sahara had ever walked into. Warm light. Dark marble. Art on the walls that cost more than the GDP of the street she grew up on in Lagos. Mrs. Shin, the housekeeper, 60s, eyes like polished stone, met them at the elevator with the expression of a woman who had seen everything and volunteered opinions about none of it. She looked at Zuhara once. Not unkindly. Not warmly. The way a woman looks at a bird that has flown through the wrong window. Ji-hoon spoke to her briefly in Korean. Mrs. Shin nodded and disappeared down a corridor without a word, her footsteps swallowed by the silence of the apartment. Zuhara stood in the center of the living room and did not move. Sit, Ji-hoon said. I'd rather stand. That's fine. He moved to the bar, unhurried, jacket already removed, cufflinks out and set on the counter with 2 precise clicks. Drink. You just had 3 men killed in a restaurant and you're offering me a drink. 2. 1 survived. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey. He's currently explaining his loyalties to people significantly less patient than me. He set a second glass on the counter without being asked. Sit or stand. But decide, because pacing without purpose is how people make bad decisions in rooms like this. Zuhara sat. She hated herself for it. He crossed the room and placed the whiskey in front of her, and that was when she saw it. On the glass table, underneath the decanter. A folder. Her name on the tab, printed in clean sans serif type as though it had been waiting there for weeks. Because it had. She opened it. Her entire life looked back at her. Lagos. Her mother's funeral. The 4 jobs. The visa expiry date circled in red. Ope's debt, every figure, every creditor, every threat she had been holding alone for 11 months, laid out in crisp black ink. You've been building this file, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. How long? Ji-hoon sat across from her, glass in hand, completely unhurried. Long enough, he said, to know you'd make exactly the choice you made tonight. He looked at her over the rim. And long enough to know you haven't made your most dangerous choice yet. The file was 43 pages long. Zuhara knew because she counted. Sitting across from the most dangerous man in Korea, whiskey untouched, hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking, she turned every page with the methodical calm of someone defusing a bomb they had accidentally built themselves. Page 1. Her visa. Expired 8 weeks ago. Page 7. Her brother Ope's gambling debts. Every figure she knew and 3 she didn't. The ones she didn't know were larger. Page 19. The Red Vikings. She stopped there. The Red Vikings were not a name she said out loud. Ever. They were the reason she worked 4 jobs. The reason she slept 3 hours a night. The reason she had been sending 60% of every paycheck to an account in Macau for 11 months while eating 1 meal a day and telling Ope everything was fine. 10 million won, she asked, voice stripped to nothing. Dollars, Ji-hoon said. The room tilted. That's not. She pressed her hand against the page. Ope borrowed 400,000 won from a broker in. The broker sold the debt, Ji-hoon said. 3 times. Each buyer added interest, penalties, and a handling fee for the inconvenience of collecting from a family with no assets. He set down his glass. The Red Vikings bought the final note 6 months ago. They added their own mathematics. He paused. The number is $10 million, Zuhara. It has been for 4 months. Why didn't they come for us? Because I bought it first. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She couldn't finish the sentence. 3 weeks ago. Before tonight. Before the restaurant. His eyes held hers without apology, without drama. The Red Vikings were going to collect on Friday. Not money. They knew there was no money. They were going to collect Ope. And then they were going to collect you. He let that land. Organ brokers in Jakarta were already notified. Zuhara's vision narrowed to a single point. You bought my brother's debt. And yours. Without telling me. You wouldn't have believed me. He leaned forward. You barely believe me now, and I'm showing you the receipts. She looked down at the file. Back up at him. What do you want? Ji-hoon reached into his jacket, slid a single sheet of paper across the table. At the top, in clean bold type, marriage contract. The paper sat between them like a loaded gun. Zuhara didn't touch it. Didn't look away from it either. She read it from a distance the way you read something that might detonate if you get too close. Marriage contract. Duration. 12 months. Terms. Debt cleared in full. Brother located and protected. Exit payment. $5 million upon completion. Why, she said. Not why me. Not why marriage. Just, why. The entire architecture of it. The file. The debt. The contract already printed, already here, as though her answer had never been in question. Because the people trying to kill me need to believe I have something to lose, Ji-hoon said. A man with nothing to protect is a man who cannot be controlled. A man with a wife. Becomes a target. Becomes a negotiation. He said it like the distinction mattered. My enemies want leverage. I'm giving them the illusion of one while building something they won't see coming. You're using me as bait. I'm offering you a transaction that saves your brother's life and makes you wealthy enough to never need anyone's protection again. His voice didn't change. What I'm using you as is entirely dependent on what you decide to be. Zuhara finally touched the paper. The cardstock was heavy. Expensive. Her name was already printed in the second signature line, Zuhara Adeyemi, in the same clean serif font as the rest of it. Not handwritten. Typeset. Prepared. You had my name on this before tonight, she said. Yes. Before the restaurant. Before the poison. Before any of this. Yes. So the question I actually need answered. She looked up at him, and something in her expression made him go very still. Is whether tonight was a coincidence. Or whether you put me in that restaurant knowing exactly what I would do. The question detonated in the space between them. Ji-hoon held her gaze for 4 full seconds, long enough for her to understand that whatever came next had been chosen carefully. I put you in proximity, he said finally. I did not script your choices. That is not a no. No, he agreed quietly. It isn't. Zuhara picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. Her chest was not. She signed her name, slow, deliberate, every letter a decision, and set the pen down. 12 months, she said. Then I take my brother and I disappear. Ji-hoon looked at the signature. Something moved across his face. Fast. Gone. 12 months, he agreed. He was already lying. She almost knew it. Mrs. Shin led her to the wardrobe at midnight. Not a bedroom. Not a bathroom first. The wardrobe, as though Ji-hoon had decided that the most urgent thing Zuhara needed after bullets and blackmail and a marriage contract signed under duress was to understand exactly how long he had been watching her. The answer was in every hanging garment. The walk-in was the size of her entire apartment in Mapo-gu. lit from above with warm amber light that made the fabrics glow. Silk, cashmere, structured linen, colors that moved through the spectrum of everything she had ever gravitated toward without knowing she had a pattern. Burnt orange, deep plum, warm ivory, the specific shade of green that sat between forest and emerald. No tags. She checked 3 dresses, 4 blouses, a coat with a collar she would have chosen herself in a different life. Nothing. No brand. No size printed anywhere. She pulled a silk dress from its hanger, the burnt orange one, her color, the color she had worn the night her mother died because it was the only clean thing she had, and held it against herself in the mirror. It was going to fit. She knew before she tried it. The cut. The length. The way the waist was constructed for a body built exactly like hers. Mrs. Shin stood in the doorway watching. How did he know? Zuhara asked. Mrs. Shin said nothing. Her face said everything. You are asking the wrong question, child. Zuhara set the dress down and turned to face the older woman fully. How long has this wardrobe been here? Mrs. Shin's mouth pressed into a line so thin it almost disappeared. The shoes, Zuhara said, moving to the rack. She picked up a heel, her size, exactly, and turned it over. Custom sole. Worn-in leather. Not new. Broken in. These aren't new. Someone broke these in. For me. She set it down carefully. These have been here for weeks. Mrs. Shin finally spoke. 1 sentence. Low. In accented English. Mr. Kwon does not do anything without a reason. That's not an answer. No. The older woman turned to leave. But it is a warning. She paused at the door without looking back. The burnt orange dress, she said quietly. He chose it himself. He said. She stopped. What? Zuhara said. What did he say? Mrs. Shin's shoulders moved. Not quite a shrug. Something more like grief. He said you would need something that felt like home. She left. Zuhara stood alone in a wardrobe full of herself, built by a stranger, and felt the first crack appear in the wall she had been constructing since 9:13 p.m. She sealed it immediately. She could not afford cracks. Not yet. Not here. The velvet box arrived at midnight. Not slid under the door. Not left on a table. Delivered by a courier who materialized inside a penthouse with supposedly impenetrable security, placed the box on Zahara's pillow with the precision of someone who had done this before, and was gone before she turned around. Which meant someone had been inside the apartment. Which meant the security Ji-hoon had described as absolute was neither. Zuhara stood at the bedroom door and looked at the box for 11 seconds before she crossed the room and opened it. Not jewelry. A photograph. High resolution. Printed within the last few hours. The ink still carried a faint chemical smell. Ope sat in a wooden chair in a room with no windows, both hands visible, holding a copy of that morning's Jungong Daily against his chest. Proof of life. Dated. Current. He was alive. His left hand had a bandage wrapped around the smallest finger. Clean white gauze. Professional. Which was somehow worse than rough. It meant someone methodical had done this. Someone who understood the difference between a message and a mistake. At the bottom of the photograph, in Ji-hoon's handwriting, she recognized it from the contract. 4 words. He stays whole. Stay. Zuhara sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. She had learned very young that crying was a transaction with no return, and she had stopped making losing investments at 15. She thought instead. Ji-hoon had told her Ope was safe. Protected. My protection, he had said in the car, with the casual certainty of a man who had never had to question whether his protection meant anything. But this photograph had not come from Ji-hoon. The handwriting was his. The message was his. But the delivery, the breach, the courier inside the sealed floor, the box on the pillow, that was someone else's architecture. Someone sending her a message inside Ji-hoon's message. We are already inside everything he thinks is safe. She stood. Walked to Ji-hoon's study. Knocked once. He opened the door immediately, still dressed, no sign of sleep, phone in hand, and looked at her face. Then at the photograph in her hand. Something shifted behind his eyes. Fast. Violent. Gone. When did this arrive? He said. 20 minutes ago. Inside this floor. She held his gaze. You told me this penthouse was impenetrable. Ji-hoon looked at the photograph for a long time. It was, he said quietly. He looked up at her, and for the first time since the restaurant, she saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not calculation. Fear. 3 days passed without another breach. Ji-hoon tripled the security. Replaced 2 men whose access logs showed irregularities. Moved Ope to a location he told no one, not even Beck, his most trusted guard. He told Zuhara only that her brother was breathing and whole and that the finger would heal clean. She accepted this the way she accepted everything in the penthouse, with the outward stillness of a woman who had decided that survival required her to become unreadable. Inwardly, she was memorizing everything. Exit routes. Guard rotations. Which cameras had blind spots and at what angle. Which of Ji-hoon's men looked at her with curiosity versus the ones who looked at her with something colder underneath. She was building a map. She told herself it was for escape. She was not entirely sure that was true anymore. On the 4th night, Mrs. Shin laid the emerald dress on the bed without a word. The Seoul Elite Gala. Ji-hoon had mentioned it once, briefly, the morning after the contract. There will be a public appearance required. Consider it part of the terms. And she had filed it away behind more urgent concerns. Now it was tonight. She dressed alone. No stylist. No instruction. Ji-hoon had left the emerald dress and a single note. You don't need help. You never have. The dress was architecture. Emerald silk that moved like water over her skin, cut to make her silhouette look like something a sculptor had spent years on. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because the dress had changed her, but because it had removed every layer of smallness she had learned to wear in rooms where she wasn't supposed to take up space. She walked out. Ji-hoon was at the bottom of the stairs. He went silent. Not the calculating silence. Not the interrogating silence. Something rawer than either. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that has just rearranged his understanding of what is possible, and then, without a word, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a necklace. 40 carats. Yellow diamond. The color of a dying sun. He placed it around her neck himself. His fingers were steady. His breathing was not. Tonight, he said quietly, you are my wife. The diamond sat at her collarbone like a declaration. Like a collar. Like a crown. She couldn't decide which terrified her more, that it felt like a trap. Or that it felt like it fit. The Seoul Elite Gala smelled of old money and fresh cruelty. Zuhara felt the room change the moment she entered it. Not dramatically. Not the way rooms change in films, with gasps and spinning heads. Subtly. The way temperature drops before a storm. Conversations thinning at the edges. Eyes moving without moving. The particular social recalibration of people who have built entire identities around knowing who belongs and who doesn't. Ji-hoon felt none of it. Or felt all of it and had simply stopped caring decades ago. He moved through the room with his hand at the small of her back. Light, proprietary, a touch that communicated ownership without effort, and the crowd parted in that specific way crowds part for men who have never once needed them to. For 40 minutes, it almost felt like safety. Almost. She was reaching for a glass of water when the woman appeared. Senator Doe's wife. 60s. Dressed in Chanel the color of old bone. The kind of woman who had perfected cruelty into something that looked, from a distance, almost like elegance. She looked at Zuhara's face. At her skin. At the yellow diamond at her collarbone. Then she turned to the woman beside her and said, loudly enough, precisely enough, I didn't realize the catering staff were allowed at the tables this year. The cluster of women laughed. Not all of them. But enough. Zuhara went very still. She had been still like this before. In Lagos at 15, when her school uniform was 2 sizes too small because her mother couldn't afford new. In Seoul at 23, when a restaurant manager told her her accent made customers uncomfortable. She knew this stillness. It was the stillness of a woman who has learned that her reaction will always be used against her. She picked up her water glass. Ji-hoon's hand left her back. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't cross the room dramatically. Simply signaled his assistant. One look, one barely perceptible nod, and turned back to his conversation as though nothing had interrupted it. 40 seconds later, Senator Do's wife received a text. Zuhara watched the color leave the woman's face. Watched her hands begin to shake around her champagne flute. Watched the text get read twice, 3 times, as though rereading it might change what it said. Ji-hoon appeared at the woman's elbow. Quiet. Unhurried. Inevitable. Apologize to my wife, he said softly. Or explain to your husband why his offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are now the subject of a National Tax Service inquiry. He tilted his head 1 degree. You have 10 seconds. The woman's mouth opened. Forgive me. Please forgive me. Ji-hoon looked at Zuhara. Not at the woman. At Zuhara. Waiting. And that, not the diamond, not the contract, not the wardrobe built from her silhouette, that was the moment the first wall came down completely. A man who had never needed anyone's approval had just burned a political career. For her. She nodded once. Ji-hoon turned away from the woman as though she had already ceased to exist. Are you all right? He said low only for her. Don't, Zuhara said quietly. Don't what? Don't make me feel something in the middle of a room full of people who are watching us to report back to whoever sent those shooters. She kept her face perfectly composed. I can't afford it right now. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. No, he agreed quietly. Neither can I. He offered his arm. She took it. Neither of them spoke about the fact that her hand was trembling. Neither of them spoke about the fact that his jaw was tight in a way that had nothing to do with politics. Across the room, a man Zuhara had never seen before raised a champagne glass in their direction. Smiling. Ji-hoon's entire body went rigid beside her. Don't look at him, Ji-hoon said. Quiet. Urgent. A different kind of urgent than she had heard from him before. Don't react. Keep walking. Who is he? Ji-hoon's hand covered hers on his arm. Pressed down. Steady. The man who sent the shooters, he said. And the man who has your brother. His name was Sung-jin Ro. Ji-hoon said it once in the car, on the way back from the gala, like a man dropping something heavy onto a table. There, now you know the weight of it. And then said nothing else for 11 minutes. Zuhara counted. She had started counting silences the way other people counted exits. It told her more than words did. Ji-hoon's silences had textures. The calculating ones were still and even, like held breath. The angry ones had a current underneath, something that moved without surfacing. This one was different. This one was old. He was your partner, she said. Not a question. Ji-hoon's jaw moved. Business, he said finally. 7 years. He built the northern routes. I built the financial architecture. He looked out the window. When I decided to dismantle the organization, to pull every asset out legally and disappear, Sung-jin decided that my exit was a threat to his survival. Because you know where everything is buried. Because I am where everything is buried. He turned to look at her. Every account. Every name. Every transaction for 11 years. It lives up here. He touched his temple. Sung-jin cannot retire until I'm dead. And he cannot kill me until he finds a way to extract what I know first. So he takes someone close to you, Zuhara said slowly. Someone you'd trade information for. The silence that followed confirmed everything. Ope, she said. The name came out stripped and raw. He doesn't know yet what you are to me, Ji-hoon said. Tonight was reconnaissance. He was measuring my reaction when I saw him. Measuring yours. His eyes stayed on her face. Which means we have a window. Small. Closing. The car stopped. The penthouse elevator. Neither of them moved immediately. You should have told me, Zuhara said. You would have run. I still might. No. He said it quietly, without arrogance. You won't. Because Ope is still out there and you will burn yourself to ash before you leave him. He paused. That's not a threat. I understand it. I would do the same. Something in his voice on that last sentence. Something that cracked, almost imperceptibly, at the edge. She looked at him. Who did you lose? She said. Ji-hoon looked back at her for a long time. Then he got out of the car. She followed him into the elevator. The doors closed. 30 floors of silence. Then he said it. Quiet, facing forward, as though the confession was easier without eye contact. My sister. 12 years ago. Sung-jin made the same calculation. He paused. I was not fast enough then. The elevator opened. He walked out. Zuhara stood alone in the elevator for 3 full seconds, the doors open, the penthouse waiting. Understanding, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the man she had married on paper was not protecting her from Sung-jin Ro. He was using her to finish something 12 years old. And she had signed the contract that made her the instrument. The question, the one that would keep her awake until 4 a.m., was whether she was angry about it. Or whether, God help her, she understood. She found the burner phone at 2 a.m. Not by searching. By accident. The kind of accident that doesn't feel like one afterward, when you replay it and notice that your hands went to exactly the right drawer on the first try, as though some part of you had already known. Ji-hoon's study. 3rd drawer. Underneath a false bottom that was just slightly too uniform to be original carpentry. The phone had one thing on it. A draft email. Unsent. Addressed to a relocation specialist in Zurich named Adiz Muller. The subject line read, Final documentation, urgent. Zuhara opened it. The email contained 4 attachments. The first was a Swiss passport. Her photograph. A name she had never used. Amara Osei. Issued 3 weeks ago. The second was a property deed. A house outside Geneva. Registered in the same name. Paid in full. The third was a bank transfer confirmation. $2 million. Already moved. Already waiting. The fourth was a one-way flight itinerary. Seoul to Zurich. Departure. 4 days from now. Passenger. Amara Osei. No ticket for Ji-hoon. No mention of the contract. No mention of the 12 months. No mention of Ope's debt or the Red Vikings or Sung-jin Ro. Just a door. Built-in secret. Already furnished. Already funded. He could have sent her. 3 weeks ago, before the restaurant, before the poison, before she had signed anything. He had built her an exit and never used it. She sat in his chair in his study in the dark and held the phone with both hands and tried to locate her anger. It was there. Underneath something else that she refused to name. He hadn't sent her away. He had chosen deliberately to keep her here instead, in the direct path of Sung-jin Ro, inside a contract that made her a target, wearing a diamond that painted a bullseye on her collarbone. He had a Swiss passport with her face on it. And he had chosen the marriage contract instead. Which meant one of 2 things. Either she was more useful to him as bait than she was as a protected asset, which she had already suspected and could survive knowing. Or something else. Something she was not ready to name at 2 a.m. in a dark study with a burner phone in her shaking hands. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She closed the phone. Replaced it. Closed the drawer. Turned around. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway. He had clearly not slept. His shirt was open at the collar. His eyes carrying the particular weight of a man who had been sitting alone with something unbearable. He looked at her sitting in his chair. He looked at the drawer. He said nothing, which told her everything. He knew she had found it. "Were you ever going to send me?" she asked. The pause before his answer was 4 seconds long. "Every day," he said quietly. "For 3 weeks. Every morning I opened that drawer and every morning I—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "Every morning you what?" Ji-hoon looked at her across the dark study, and the expression on his face was the most dangerous thing she had seen since the restaurant. More dangerous than the shooters. More dangerous than Sung-jin's smile across the gala floor. "Because it was honest. Every morning I chose you over your safety," he said. "And I have no defense for that. None." Zuhara stood up. She crossed the room. She stopped 18 inches from him, close enough to see the exact moment his breathing changed, and she looked at him with everything she had refused to feel since 9:13 p.m. "Find my brother," she said, "before I decide whether to forgive you for that." She walked past him to her room. She did not sleep. Neither did he. She could tell by the light under his study door. It stayed on until morning. Ji-hoon left at 4 a.m. No goodbye. No note. Zuhara heard the elevator from her room, that soft hydraulic exhale of the doors closing, and lay in the dark counting the silence that followed. She told herself the tightness in her chest was practical, strategic. The anxiety of a woman who understood that her primary protection had just walked out of the building. She told herself it had nothing to do with the light under his study door going dark at 3:58 a.m. 2 minutes after it went dark, he left. As though he had made a decision in those 2 minutes and acted on it before he could unmake it. She got up at 5 a.m. Showered. Dressed in the burnt orange, her color, his choice, and went to the kitchen where Mrs. Shin had left coffee without being asked. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and watched Seoul wake up 80 floors below and tried to think clearly about Sung-jin Row. She was still thinking at 5:47 a.m. when the elevator opened. Mrs. Shin appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face, that face which had expressed nothing in 4 days, was expressing something now. Something small and controlled and wrong. "Mrs. Kwon," she said. "The East Corridor camera." The lights went out. All of them. Simultaneously. The entire penthouse dropping into the blue-gray half-dark of pre-dawn Seoul filtering through 80 floors of glass. Zuhara set her coffee down. She moved toward Ji-hoon's study, the burner phone, the drawer, some instinct she couldn't name, and the elevator opened behind her. She turned. 3 men. Not Ji-hoon's men. She knew Ji-hoon's men, their posture, their restraint, the professional invisibility they wore like a second skin. These men were different. Louder in their bodies. Tattoos climbing their throats, red ink, Viking runes, the mark she had seen in Ji-hoon's file photographs. They weren't carrying guns. That was the first thing that told her how serious this was. Guns were for people you wanted dead. The chloroform rag told her what they wanted instead. She ran. 3 steps toward the corridor before the first one caught her arm, enormous hand, iron grip, and spun her. She drove her elbow back, connected, heard him grunt. Bought herself 2 seconds. Used them to scream Ji-hoon's name into the empty penthouse because some irrational part of her still believed he might hear it. He didn't. The second man came from her left. The rag covered her mouth and nose with a chemical sweetness that tasted like the end of something. The last thing she saw was the floor-to-ceiling window. Seoul below. Beautiful. Indifferent. The last thing she thought was not about escape. It was about the light under his study door. And whether leaving at 4 a.m. had been a decision. Or a setup. She woke up to the smell of damp earth and old decisions. The basement had no windows. No ambient light from outside to give her a time reference. No sound from above to tell her what city she was in or how long she had been unconscious. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, industrial, bare, the kind that makes skin look like something already dead. Her wrists were zip-tied to a metal chair. She tested them once. Efficient. Quiet. The plastic was fresh, tight enough to mean they had done this recently, loose enough to mean they wanted her conscious and undamaged. For now. She filed that detail and went still. The man across from her had been watching her wake up. She recognized him. Blue Dragon Bistro. The waiter with the trembling jaw and the vial. Up close, without the pressed collar and the performance of invisibility, he was something different entirely. Compact. Patient. The particular stillness of a man who enjoyed the anticipation more than the event. He was unrolling a leather case on the table in front of him. Surgical steel. Each instrument held in its own loop. Cleaned. Ordered by size. "You look better than your file photograph," he said. His English carried a Seoul accent sharpened by years somewhere colder. Ji-hoon always had taste. "I'll give him that." Zuhara said nothing. Sung-jin wants to know 3 things. He selected an instrument, thin, hooked at the end, and turned it in the light with the appreciation of a craftsman. Where Ji-hoon moved the northern accounts after Busan. The name of the NTS insider Ji-hoon controls. And he looked at her. How much you actually know versus how much you're pretending not to. "I'm his wife of 4 days, Zuhara said. "He doesn't tell me about accounts." "No." The man smiled. "But he tells you things he's never told anyone else." Sung-jin saw it at the gala. The way he positioned himself when I entered the room. The way he covered your hand. He set the instrument down and picked up a different one. Ji-hoon Kwon has not cared about another human being in 12 years. And then suddenly, he gestured at her. "You." "So this is leverage," she said. "This is a conversation." He stood, crossed toward her. "The leverage comes after." He crouched to her eye level. "Where are the accounts, Zuhara?" She looked at him steadily. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, as though he had expected this answer and had already planned the next 4 hours around it. He reached for her left hand. She looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling, small, red light, actively recording, and understood 2 things simultaneously. This was being transmitted somewhere. And Ji-hoon was watching. She looked directly into the lens. She said one word. Quiet. Steady. In Yoruba air, the word her mother used when she needed Zuhara to remember what she was made of. Victory. Then she looked back at the man with the instruments. And she smiled. He went for the ring finger. Of course he did. The symbolism was the point. Strip the diamond, strip the marriage, strip whatever protection the Kwon name had draped over her. He pressed the cold flat of the blade against her skin just below the knuckle and watched her face for the thing he wanted most. Fear. She gave him nothing. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was. The fear was there, bright and specific, located precisely behind her sternum. But she had learned at 15 that fear shown is fear weaponized against you. So she looked at the blade and then she looked at him and she kept her face as neutral as the wall behind him. "The ring isn't worth anything to me," she said. "It's a prop. Everything Ji-hoon touches is worth something to me," the man said. "That's the point. Then you understand him less than you think." He pressed slightly harder. She felt the edge. Didn't move. "The accounts," he said again. "I told you. You told me what you were instructed to tell me if this happened." He tilted his head. Ji-hoon prepares people. He scripts their responses. I've seen it before. He leaned closer. What I want is the thing he didn't script. The thing you know that he doesn't know you know. The burner phone. The Zurich email. A D's Muller and a passport with her face on it. She kept all of it completely off her face. "There's nothing," she said. He made the first cut. Small. Deliberate. Along the side of her finger, not across it. A message, not a removal. She hissed through her teeth. Felt the warmth. Did not look down. She looked at the camera. Ji-hoon was watching. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. Certain, physical, beyond argument. Come on, she thought at the lens. But don't come yet. because she had felt something in the last 4 minutes that the man with the instruments had not noticed her feeling. The zip ties. Not the wrists. The chair's back rail where the ties looped through. Old metal, slightly corroded, the kind that looks solid until the exact right angle of pressure meets the exact right point of weakness. She had been finding that angle since she woke up. She was 3 movements away from it. She needed 30 more seconds. She looked back at the man and gave him something. Not fear, something that looked like the edge of breaking. A tremor at the jaw. A blink held half a second too long. He leaned in closer. Exactly what she needed. The northern accounts, he said softly. Last chance. Zuhara took a breath. Okay, she whispered. Broken sounding. Perfectly constructed. Okay. I'll tell you. He smiled. She snapped the rail. The rail broke with a sound like a gunshot. The man lurched back, instinct, not strategy. And that half-second of pure surprise was all Zuhara needed. She was already moving. Wrists still tied but arms free from the chair, she drove forward, used his momentum against him, and put him into the table with enough force to scatter the surgical instruments across the concrete floor. He was bigger. He recovered fast. But she was already past him. She ran for the door. Locked, of course. She had clocked it the moment she woke up. And in the 2 seconds before he reached her, she did the one thing that had no explanation in the file Ji-hoon had built on her. She reached into the hem of her dress. The emerald gown. The one Mrs. Shin had laid out for the gala. The one Ji-hoon had chosen himself, had standing instructions about, had, she understood now, altered without telling her. A hidden seam along the left hem, tight enough to be invisible, containing a spike of hardened steel no longer than her thumb. Not a weapon she had put there. One that had been put there for her. As though someone had known she would need it. She pulled it free. The man grabbed her from behind, arm across her throat, lifting, and she drove the spike backward into his thigh, angled precisely to miss bone and hit the cluster of nerves that turned a leg temporarily to dead weight. He dropped. She didn't wait to watch him fall. She ran her tied wrists along the broken rail edge twice. The zip tie split, and she was at the door, through it, into a corridor that smelled of mildew and distant sea salt. Busan. She knew it suddenly and completely. The smell, the humidity, the particular quality of the dark. They had driven her south while she was unconscious. 4 hours minimum. She ran. Behind her she heard him getting up, heard him screaming into a radio, heard the bass percussion of boots on stairs above her. She ran faster. And then she stopped. Because her brain, which had been operating on pure adrenaline for the last 4 minutes, caught up with the spike in her hand, and detonated a question she had been carrying since the gala without knowing it. Ji-hoon had sewn a weapon into her dress before she was taken. Before the breach. Before the Vikings entered the penthouse. Before. Which meant he had known they were coming. She stood in the dark corridor with blood on her hand and a spike he had hidden for her and the sound of boots getting closer, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like being hit with cold water, that she had not been taken by surprise. She had been delivered. Ji-hoon Kwon had known about the breach. And he had let it happen. The door didn't open. It came off its hinges. One controlled explosion. Shaped charge, precisely placed, the kind that takes out a door without touching the walls around it. And then smoke, and then Ji-hoon, walking through it like a man who had been on the other side for longer than anyone knew. He didn't sweep the room. Didn't clear corners. Didn't move with the tactical crouch of a man entering hostile territory. He walked in upright. Because he already knew what was in here. Zuhara stood 12 feet away in the corridor, blood on her hand, spike in her fist, and she watched him move through the smoke and she felt 2 things simultaneously. A relief so physical it was almost violent, and a rage so clean it cut through everything else like the surgical steel she'd left on the basement floor. He saw her. He stopped. His eyes went to her hand. The cut. The dried blood along her finger. Then to the spike. His spike, the one he had sewn into the hem of a dress he chose himself, and something crossed his face that she had no name for yet. Not guilt. Worse than guilt. Recognition. The look of a man seeing a consequence he had calculated and chosen anyway. You knew, she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. A fact, delivered flat, the way you hand someone something that belongs to them. Zuhara. You knew about the breach before it happened. She didn't move toward him. Didn't move away. You left at 4 a.m. knowing they were coming. You put a weapon in my dress because you needed me taken, needed Sung Jin to believe he had leverage, and you needed me to survive it. She paused. I was the operation. Ji-hoon said nothing, which was the loudest confirmation she had ever received. Behind him, his men were moving through the building. She could hear them on the floors above, the systematic percussion of rooms being cleared. Sung Jin's men being removed one by one. Where is Ope? She said. 3rd floor. North room. Beck has him. Is he whole? Unharmed? Angry? A pause. He has your mouth. She almost laughed. She stopped herself. You used me, she said. Yes. No qualification. No architecture of justification. Just, yes. The spike in the dress. I needed you to get out on your own. If I came in too early, Sung Jin's man would have triggered a dead switch, an account purge that would have destroyed the evidence we needed to bury him legally. His jaw tightened. I needed him confident. I needed him leaning in. I needed you to be exactly what you were, which was more than he expected and more than I. He stopped. More than you what? She said. Ji-hoon crossed the 12 feet between them. He stopped close enough that she could see the exact cost of the last 6 hours on his face. And it was significant. Whatever control he wore like a second skin had been worn through to something raw underneath. He reached for her injured hand. Careful. Both of his wrapped around hers. More than I had any right to ask, he said quietly. She looked at their hands. You should have told me, she said. I would have done it. Knowingly. I would have walked in there myself. I know, he said. That's why I couldn't tell you. She looked up at him. Because if I walked in willingly it wouldn't have looked real, she said slowly. Sung Jin needed to believe he had taken me. Needed to believe I was genuinely terrified. She searched his face. So you needed my fear to be real? Yes. Which means you spent 6 hours watching a man hurt me on a live feed. His hands tightened around hers. Yes, he said. The word came out of somewhere deep and damaged. Zuhara looked at him for a long time. Did you get what you needed? She said. Everything. Every transmission from that room goes directly to the NTS. Sung Jin is already in custody. The accounts are frozen. It's over. For you, she said. He flinched. It was the smallest movement. A millimeter of something cracking. Zuhara. Ope appeared at the top of the stairs, Beck behind him, one hand on his shoulder, and her brother's face when he saw her was the only uncomplicated thing that had happened since 9:13 p.m. She went to him. Let him hold her. Felt him shaking. Or maybe that was her. Over his shoulder she looked at Ji-hoon. He was still standing where she had left him, holding the air where her hand had been. 7 days later, Zuhara packed one bag. Not the emerald dress. Not the burnt orange silk. Not a single item from the wardrobe he had built from her silhouette before she knew his name. She took the clothes she had arrived in, washed, folded, returned to her by Mrs. Shin without comment, and her brother's hand, and she stood at the elevator with her back to the penthouse. Ope was quiet beside her. He had been quiet since Busan. The kind of quiet that meant he was counting the cost of his choices and finding the number unbearable. She hadn't made it easier for him. She didn't have the energy for that yet. The elevator doors opened. She didn't press the button. The contract, Ji-hoon said from behind her. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 12 months, she said. We agreed. We agreed on 12 months. His voice was measured. Careful. The voice he used when he was managing something he was afraid of mishandling. 7 days is not 12 months. The terms were debt cleared, brother found, exit payment. She turned. Sung Jin is in custody. The debt is cleared. Ope is standing next to me. She met his eyes. I'm not taking the 5 million. Something moved across his face. That's not. He stopped. Started again. Zuhara. The danger isn't over. Sung Jin had partners. People who know your face now. Who know what you mean to. He stopped again. What I mean to you, she finished. The words fell between them and neither of them picked them up. Ji-hoon stood in the center of his penthouse in the grey morning light, and he looked, for the first time since a restaurant at 9:13 p.m., like a man who did not know his next move. All the architecture stripped away. The calculation, the control, the fluid certainty that had survived bullets and betrayal and 12 years of Sung Jin-ro. Gone. Just a man. Watching a woman choose the door. I need to know something, Zuhara said. Before I leave. I need you to answer it honestly, and I need you to answer it once. Anything, he said. The Swiss passport. The house in Geneva. The 2 million already waiting. She held his gaze. If I had found that phone and run, 3 weeks ago, before the restaurant, before any of this, would you have let me go? The silence lasted 8 seconds. She counted. No, he said. Not with arrogance. Not with possession. With the particular honesty of a man who has stopped lying to himself about something important. No, he said again. I would have followed you. To Geneva. To Lagos. Wherever you went. He paused. I told myself it was strategy. Asset protection. That you were operationally significant. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the bottom of the stairs in the emerald dress, like something that had rearranged his understanding of what was possible. It wasn't strategy. Zuhara looked at him for a long time. Ope shifted beside her. Said nothing. He had her mother's wisdom, knowing when silence was the only honest contribution. She turned back to the elevator. Pressed the button. The contract is void, she said. I'm not your wife. The doors opened. She stepped in. Ope followed. She faced forward, her reflection in the elevator's mirrored back wall looking at her with an expression she hadn't decided the name for yet. Zuhara. His voice. Just her name. Nothing attached to it, no strategy, no calculation, no architecture of control. Just her name in his mouth the way it had been in the restaurant, before she knew he knew it, before she understood what that knowing meant. She put her hand on the door sensor, held it open, did not turn around. The danger, she said quietly. Sung Jin's partners. The people who know my face. She paused. How long before it's safe? A beat. Honestly. Always. 6 months, he said. Maybe 8. She nodded slowly. Then I want an apartment, she said. Not this floor. Not a cage. My own space. My own door. My own key. She paused. Ope gets a job, a real one, nothing connected to you. And you tell me everything. Every operation. Every risk. Every decision that involves my life. She turned her head. Not fully, just enough. No more weapons sewn into dresses I don't know about. The silence had a different texture now. Warmer. More dangerous. And in 8 months, he said quietly. She let the door go. As it closed, she caught his reflection in the mirror, and the expression on his face was something she knew she would spend the next 8 months trying not to think about. She failed immediately. Ask me in 8 months, she said. The doors closed. Ope looked at her sideways. You like him, he said. Shut up, Ope. You like him. The elevator descended. 80 floors of silence. She was smiling before they hit the 40th. She sealed it before they hit the ground.